Good morning, everyone. My name is Franz Tanai, and as a partner of Galen WG, hard to say sometimes, and leader of the Latin American Initiative, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to our Opportunities in Colombia Update 2017, Infrastructure Development and Smart Cities, that is organized by our close friends of the Canada-Colombia Chamber of Investment of Trade. We have a very interesting event today. We have a full agenda. First of all, we're very excited to have again with us our keynote speaker, the Colombian Ambassador to Canada, the Honorable Nicolás Lloreda. Bienvenido, Embajador. We will then hear about social infrastructure and smart cities opportunities in Bogotá from Juan Gabriel Pérez and Juan Carlos Jiménez from Invest Bogotá. Invest Bogotá is the investment promotion agency for Bogotá, an initiative of the Chamber of Commerce of Bogotá and the city government of Bogotá. And finally, we're going to hear about experiences doing business in Colombia, particularly the infrastructure sector, and from a very, very interesting panel. So I'm going to pass the word to Andres Divino, President of the Canadian-Colombian Chamber of Investment and Trade. He will provide the opening remarks.
Thank you, Franz. His Excellency Nicolás Lloreda, Ambassador of Colombia to Canada, Cristina Pastrana, Consul General of Colombia in Toronto, Álvaro Concha, Trade Commissioner of Colombia in Canada, Gilma Heras, Trade Commissioner and Info Center Manager at Global Affairs Canada, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andres Trevino, and I'm the President of the Canada-Colombia Chamber of Investment and Trade. We are an independent organization that was created here in Canada to promote business relations between the two countries. Among the industries that we promote, we have energy, infrastructure, mining, oil and gas, smart cities, clean tech, and social initiatives. I want to thank Ambassador Nicolás Lloreda for accepting our invitation. Juan Gabriel Pérez from Invest in Bogotá, thank you for accepting the invitation as well. I want to thank our panel, Jean Sebastian, Tori, Carl, Juan. Thank you for accepting the invitation. I want to thank Allianz for hosting this event. I want to thank our partners, Colombia and Global Affairs, and our sponsors, EDC, KPMG, Scotiabank, U308 Corp, and Copa Airline, which I actually use very often. I like it very much. Good connection. I'm pleased to introduce His Excellency Nicolás Lloreda, Ambassador of Colombia to Canada. Ambassador Lloreda has brought vast international experience to this role, based on a career that combines an impressive path of representing the Colombian government abroad with an outstanding practice in international corporate law. Prior to his current post, he proudly represented Colombia as Deputy Chief of Mission for the Colombian Embassy in Washington, a city that also witnesses success in practicing law at Sydney and Austin and Cole and Murray. Prior to moving to DC, he served as General Director of the Andean Community Free Trade Zone. Finally, I would like to mention that in 2010, the Colombian government appointed him as mediator before the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes. Without further delays, I invite you to please welcome Ambassador Lloreda. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming this morning on this beautiful day and enjoying some Colombian coffee. I'm sure it's Colombian, right? And I want to thank Andres Trevino and Gowlings for setting this up. I will try to be brief because we have a wonderful panel afterwards, and I want to learn from all these money makers what's really happening. Let me, I prepared a presentation and I divided it in 4 basic subjects. I want to start with my Colombia 101. There's always people in the audience that know more about Colombia than I do, but sometimes there is somebody that maybe is not as focused and maybe they get something out of an explanation as the way the government sees what's happening. I'll talk a little bit about the peace accord. There's always a couple questions on what's happening in the peace accord, and then the bilateral relationship and opportunities on infrastructure. So, I always, in my presentations, regardless of the subject, I was in Quebec last week and in Montreal doing different presentations on not infrastructure, but cooperatives and social stuff. But I like also to begin whatever presentation with this chart, because I think that, unfortunately, unless you have really good vision, I doubt that you can read what it says there. I know I couldn't, but let me try to compare a little bit the Colombia 50 years ago to the Colombia of today. And one of the things that has happened in many countries, including Colombia, is that 50 years ago we were mostly a rural country. More than half, almost 70% of Colombians lived in the rural areas, whereas now maybe 20% of all Colombians live in the rural areas. So that's a big change. At the same time, all the main indicators of human development have really risen, and there's huge differences to what Colombia was 50 years ago when the conflict with FARC and many of the guerrilla groups began. Infant mortality, the increase of life expectancy at birth, reduction of poverty are all numbers that if you see in Colombia 98% of people have health care coverage. Just in 1993 it was 25%. Education, literacy rate back then was 60%, now it's 99%. Access to higher education, number of people graduating from high school or college every year has multiplied significantly since then. Another thing, chart that I like to use for you to take an idea, and this one goes just to 1991. So we're talking about what Colombia looked like and what Colombia looked like since 1810 when we became a country. You know, Canada is turning 150 this Saturday. We are 206 years old, and it was not until the year 2012 that Colombia's largest group of population was middle class. So it took us 200 years to become a country with a middle class that would be the stronger group. But you see throughout these years, it was really a country of extreme poverty, very small elite, and a middle class that wasn't even third. So this change brings a lot of things that happen in Colombia that are important. A middle class, of course, is the essence and the future for our country to continue to grow, but it's also a population that expects more services, more things, better education. You don't have to worry anymore about what you're going to eat next week. You don't have to worry about the quality of the school of your children, the transportation, certain services, more protests, more democracy. At the same time, I think, I know that a big reason why we achieved this milestone that I mentioned about the middle class had to do with the fact that Colombia, like many countries in Latin America, benefited immensely from the price of oil, the price of commodities, and the growth that we all felt throughout Latin America. More than 10 years of growth, averaging 4.6%, had a lot to do with it. This was, if we compare ourselves with the largest economies of Latin America, we were doing pretty well in terms of the average growth during all those years. Again, in 2017, of course, things are very different. Of course, with the price of oil being what it is, all the economies in Latin America are not growing at the levels that they were. We expect 2% growth, which for our averages and for the past few years is significantly low. And I know that this doesn't help a lot when you're trying to convince certain businessmen, but you have to look at the whole region and see what's happening in the whole region to get an idea that this goes beyond what is happening. So we are coming to an area after more than 15 years of much less growth throughout the whole region. Now, one of the things that we have focused on in the government, in the last 6 years has focused on is joining the OECD. And a lot of people are not familiar with the OECD as I think something more of interest of economists, of analysts, people that like to handle economic data. But for Colombia, joining the OECD is extremely important. It is extremely important because it is probably the best way to go before, let's say, a very capable board of directors that will just look at your policies and the transparency of your policies and everything that has to do with trade, with education, with labor, with economic conditions, with the stock market, and following these recommendations, implementing the changes that the OECD gives you before you can be a full member of the OECD are, in the opinion of the Colombian government, extremely important. So we expect to be full members by the end of this year or the beginning of next year. And again, this is one of these long-term investments that will, by changing the laws, by changing the structure, by opening the transparency of the companies that are owned by the state, of the practices of government in general, will make Colombia a much more efficient place. Another thing that is worth mentioning is that Colombia continues to advance in the ranking for doing business worldwide. Even though the World Bank ranking last year put us at number 54 in 190 countries, we continue to grow 5 to 10 positions every year. So there's a lot of concerted effort, and I'm sure we'll hear more in the presentation of Invest Bogotá, mostly a cities-led effort to streamline business, to make it easier for companies to get incorporated, to start functioning, to get their permits, to do their contracts, to rationalize the use of services, etc. Now, this is another slide that I'd like to show, because if I ask people in this room, if somebody has never ever heard a bad thing about Colombia, please raise your hand. So I wasn't expecting a lot of hands. But at the same time, even though I would like to blame Hollywood, and I was checking the cable company the other day, those movies that you can rent for $5. There were three movies that it was like some adventure in this crazy Colombia and something goes terribly wrong. And I, as a Colombian representative, get really mad with these things. But I understand that there is a lot of history behind this and a lot of truth behind the history of Colombia, which is a history of a country with a lot of violence, especially in the last 20 years. So, Colombian paradox for me is how Colombia is the only country in Latin America that has grown economically every year, with the exception of 1999 for the last 50 years. It's the only country in Latin America that has never defaulted in its debt. It's a country that has an economic central bank that has handled its economy in a very orthodox way, that is very pro-investor, but at the same time is a country with a terrible history of violence. And the chart that I show is, you look at the blue line is the number of civilians that were killed in the conflict in Colombia. This is beginning in 1958 when the conflict began. This is the orange line is the soldiers, troops, guerrillas, people that were in the fight directly, and this is just the people that were involved. But then we see the GDP of Colombia, always growing, with the exception right here of 1998, the red point. And so this is something that generally is difficult to understand. How can a country continue to grow economically? How can it continue slowly to grow its middle class and have this level of violence? Well, one of the many answers, many reasons, but one of the quick ones is, first of all, that the conflict was mostly focused on the remote rural areas of the country. So you were talking about two countries. You were talking about urban centers, like Bogotá, like Medellin, like Cali, cities that were thriving, growing. People were moving to the cities. and the brunt of the conflict was really happening in rural areas. So you could do business, you could prosper, but you couldn't travel safely between cities unless you flew. This was unsustainable, of course, and fortunately, things have changed significantly in that aspect, and very positively. Now, one of the for example, to see that there's different angles to everything. We're expecting a 2% growth this year, much lower than we've had in many years. Again, for a lot of reasons, including international reasons. But at the same time, our Superintendency of Industry and Trade just reported that last year, the largest 1,000 companies in Colombia increased their profits by more than 5%, and all of them posted record sales. Now, at the same time, the following 1,000 companies grew in 14.9%, especially the sectors of industry, construction, and agribusiness. So even during the slowdown, we see healthy growth in many aspects. Let me talk now quickly about the cost of war and the peace accord. So, as I was saying and explaining in my chart about the paradox, we continue with economic growth and these levels of violence that keep growing. And so, a lot of people throughout the years in Colombia have been asking themselves, well, what was the cost of war? The cost of war is huge. One calculation puts it at 76.6 US billion. This is just what the government has had to spend in military expenditures and just to take care of the effects of terrorism and of violence. The size of our security forces. One of the largest armies in Latin America. The second in Latin America after Brazil, and more importantly, if you look at the war budget per institution every year, there's a big debate. If you've been looking at the news, President Trump in the US is pressuring his G7 and G20 countries to increase defense because he's saying that the US shouldn't be the only country paying for defense. During World War II, the US was pressuring the Allies and was pressuring Canada to spend 3% of GDP. The last 25 years, they've been asking them to spend 1.5, raise it to 2% of GDP, but Canada spends less than 1% in defense of GDP. Many countries in Western Europe do that. Colombia had to spend 3.4% of GDP in security, in defense. And this makes it much more difficult to allocate the budget to other needs. For the last 2 years, for the first time in Colombia's history, or at least since records exist in the last 50 years, we spend more money on education than in security. So this is what we see as the way forward, and just really reallocating the very limited budget expenses that we have. Another cost is the deaths of the conflict. We think of the damage in Colombia of the war, and during the really ugly part of the conflict, which was between 1994 and 2004, was the majority of the murders. But over the last 50 years, since the war began with FARC and the guerrillas, 220,000 people were killed. There were reports of more than 6 million people displaced from their homes, more than 27,000 kidnappings, rapes, 10,000 people victims of anti-personnel mines. So it was a very high and unsustainable cost. Now, the government embarked in a peace agreement with FARC after different governments have failed to secure an agreement with FARC in more than 40 years. And the only reason that they succeeded, I think, this time, was because they did something that is very Canadian. They did their homework. They really studied what had happened, what had went wrong in all of this different peace process throughout the world and in Colombia. They went to Northern Ireland, they brought people from South Africa, they brought people from Yugoslavia. They spoke to many people and prepared themselves, learning from all the mistakes and all the failed efforts. They secured a peace agreement that is being implemented as we speak. FARC has demobilized to 23 different areas in the country of Colombia. This week they're laying down all the weapons, which I think is a significant milestone. They have provided the GPS information for their hidden weapons in the jungle to the United Nations, and they are on their path to becoming a political party. The implementation of the peace agreement will take a lot of time and will be bumpy, because that's what happens in all the implementations of all peace agreements throughout the world. But it will allow the government for a lot and Colombians opportunities to really focus on issues like education, like transportation, like infrastructure, like continue to increase our middle class. As I said before, the brunt of the conflict was suffered by the most remote areas. So, one of the promises that the government did to the guerrillas when they sat down was, we are going to really transform the countryside in Colombia, because that was the origin of the conflict. 50 years ago, the FARC, which became a terrorist organization that committed innumerable crimes, began as a political organization, are a political organization. Their competence received during those 50 years, every day, 2 to 4 hours of communist indoctrination. But their main claim was land reform, was the fact that so many peasants that were pushed by the lands, didn't have property rights, and couldn't have a living in the rural areas. So the government made a very large commitment to transform this. And transforming this means that there's a lot of things to be done. Of course, you have to build roads. Easier said than done, especially to remote areas where the markets are small. You can very quickly convince large companies to build, to improve the roads between Bogota and Medellin, or to the ports, or to the large centers, because there's a market, there are tolls, there's money to be made. But invest on roads that go to very small little towns. It's like for Canadians when they have to invest in the north, in the Great North, to very small communities, very remote communities, and how expensive it is to maintain and protect those communities. So I think it's a valid comparison. And transforming the rural area of Colombia, as you see in the map here, is roughly a country which very vast and remote areas. You have to do many things. Some are very popular, and some are very unpopular, and some are difficult. I think among the unpopular, I would say probably land reform has an element that is very important. Everybody that owns a condo or an apartment in a city pays real estate taxes and has no problems with it, because they know, that's what you do. Sadly, in Colombia, the large landowners are not used to paying big real estate taxes for their land. Practically, they pay very little. Some do, but the majority pay very little taxes for their land. And so there is an incentive to own land that is really not productive. For you, as many economists and many wealthy people in Colombia have argued for decades, when you know you have to pay taxes over land, you don't want to have thousands of acres with cattle grazing and just visiting on the weekends your farm. You want a very productive area that can export, that can produce top crops, or cattle, or pork, or goats, or whatever you want to do, but in a very technical way, because you're paying taxes and you want to do a big business out of it. Colombia has a huge potential in terms of feeding a big part of the world. We have ideal climate conditions, we have lots of water, we have 12 hours of light every day, all year, and lots of arable and land that would be ideal to build the agribusiness. This is why the country has always thought that we should be an engine of growth in the agro industry. But again, this is a long-term project. It requires investment from the private sector, requires very clear rules, and has strong opponents. Now, at the same time, we also have to put there the fact that some of those areas with FARC gone, there will be other groups interested in taking power there in order to use it for what they do, which is illegal crop growth and selling of narco-traffickers. So the government has to provide security, economic conditions, deal with this, and deal with people that don't want to pay taxes altogether. What are the dividends of peace? Well, you know, of course, one of the things that we like to claim is that in the last 2 years, we've had the lowest level of homicides in 40 years in Colombia. That, I think, is for us, is a very important number. Even more so with the ceasefire with FARC. The numbers continue to go down, and this is a very welcome development. We still have to go significantly lower, as you can see, but if you look for just where we started 10 years ago, where we were, and it's even higher if you go up to 2000 and 1995. We see the benefits. Now, look at the victims of landmines, most of which are always civilians. There was a big story that we have a military hospital in Bogota, and for the first time in 50 years, it's empty. It's practically empty. They're receiving 1 or 2 people maybe hit by a mine in remote areas every year, when it used to be hundreds and hundreds every year. So all of these are measurable benefits of seeking peace. But it's a long process, and it hasn't been ever done overnight. Now there's a number of challenges to this, as I was mentioning. For example, the implementation, one of the most controversial aspects of the peace agreement is that many people do not accept the fact that FARC will not face prosecutions in normal courts. And when they were responsible for crimes against humanity, for genocide, for terrible crimes and violations of human rights. So, and you know, the answer to that is that up until the Colombia peace agreement, all peace agreements in the world provided full blanket amnesty. You don't negotiate with the government peace and they say, and then now I'm going to go to jail for 30 years. You generally go to jail for 30 years when they grab you alive and they take you. Government sat down the organization and for the first time had to tell them something that did not happen in South Africa or in Northern Ireland or in Yugoslavia or had happened ever before in Colombia, and told them, we cannot give you a full blanket amnesty. Under the international rules, under the International Court of Justice, if we do that, you will be able to be prosecuted anywhere. And we would have a lot of problems with a lot of countries because Colombia would be seen as violating international law. So we will create a special legal system in which you will be, the people that are accused will be prosecuted. If found guilty, they would have to serve a term in restricted locations. If you don't confess to any of these crimes, the number of years in which you could end up being secluded or without liberty privileges could go up significantly to even 20 years, which is something that, now if you confess to all your crimes and provide compensation, the limit would be between 4 and 6 years of the time that you will pay for your crime. You will have to compensate your victims, you will have to confess. And this was done after innumerable consultations with representatives of the victims in Colombia, which in the great majority of the cases always argued that for them the most important thing was the truth, finding out what happened to my father, what happened to my sister, where is she, why was she killed. That's what they, not as much as, and I want you to go to jail for 50 years. So that and the political negotiation created this system, the special jurisdiction system, which is now being implemented, but that of course has been extremely criticized by the opposition to the peace agreement. Another question that I get a lot is what's going to happen with the ELN peace talks. ELN is a small guerrilla group, very fanatic, I would say. founded by two Spanish priests in the 1960s, much more less hierarchical than FARC, with their fronts in the jungles that are very independent, and they have been responsible for blowing up oil pipelines in the remote areas of Colombia and creating horrible environmental disasters for many, many years. The government is also seeking peace with them. The government, as they did with FARC, will not enter into a ceasefire and will continue to persecute anybody that violates the law, as long as these groups are kidnapping and committing crimes. Now, so there are talks outside of the country with ELN. It's difficult to know how well they will go. They're a very extreme, smaller group, so that's a problem that remains. But at the same time, like many analysts say, for the first time, the army is going to have time really to focus on them. And they know that, because they don't have to focus on FARC, which was the real big main enemy. So we'll see what happens there. Now, of course, as I said, enforcement of land rights, the state presence, and dealing with illicit crops will be the other challenges that we're facing. Let's talk now about Canada and Colombia. One of the brands that we've discovered that is very interesting in Canada is the Pacific Alliance, which is the trade agreement between Chile, Peru, Mexico, and Colombia that is aiming for creating one single market in those four countries. And coincidentally, it is the focus of many Canadian investors. So they are at the same time in these four countries. They see that these four countries in Latin America are among the four countries that chose a different path than many of their neighbors. They chose a path of open markets, of independent branches of government, of democracy, of free trade, and this is something that is very attractive for venture capital and for capital investment that all those countries seek. And so they've been among the countries where Canada has invested the most in Latin America, and there are all of them economies that are doing, in average, much better than many others in the region. Now, interestingly, last year Canada was the largest foreign investor in Colombia. This was done really because there was a purchase by a large asset manager of a large company in Colombia, so that was a blip. But Canadian foreign investment, or Canadian investment in Colombia continues every year, mostly in the extractive sector, but every time more we see it in services, technology, we see it in more sectors, financing, that were not there before. So again, this is all going the right way. Our bilateral trade is, in my opinion, small, considering we have a free trade agreement. We've had a free trade agreement for over 6 years now. And I think that in one way, even though Canadian exports have grown and Colombians keep buying more products from Canada, the truth is that in the case of Colombian exports, the Colombian exporters have been focusing more on the U.S., considering it's, in their opinion, considering it's a bigger market, and also taking into account the fact that it is difficult for many of these Colombian businessmen to travel to Canada as easily as it is to travel to the United States. But again, we continue to sell our coal, our coffee, chemicals, flowers, and we buy a lot of grain, we buy a lot of machinery, and we buy a lot of manufacturing products as well. Now, this panel this meeting today has a focus on infrastructure, and I wanted to briefly mention a couple of things here. First one is that sorry, making a mess here. There's a couple of I've been talking about this infrastructure initiative for a while, but let me explain to me what is happening. As you knew, as I mentioned, I'm very proud of the fact that my country continued to grow economically during those difficult times of high insecurity. But one of the things that many people in Colombia recognized and knew was that the quality of our infrastructure had fallen behind and fell behind significantly. When the security situation really deteriorated in the 90s, all of the large international construction companies left. Many international companies that had built pipelines in very remote areas of Colombia, that had been involved in very large projects, they all left. And the local companies that many didn't have the capacity took advantage of, some of them did great things and they were good, serious construction companies, but they didn't have the financial muscle in many cases. And one thing that is endemic in many countries, that you probably have heard about, that happened in Colombia as well, was that the government would bid on a project, on an infrastructure project. And, obviously, this is public money, so we want to make sure we utilize it carefully. So inevitably, the lowest bidder would win. And almost inevitably, the lowest bidder would not finish without asking for additions and additions and additions. This has happened throughout the world. This is one problem of infrastructure. Has a lot to do with regulations, has a lot to do with planning, has a lot to do with distrust of giving public money to a private company. But all of these are problems that are fixed, and the government embarked on a huge transformation of the whole infrastructure legal system that took many years. What would happen in Colombia, and it has happened in Argentina, Brazil, in Mexico, even in Canada many times, was that, for example, if you knew that one day the highway had to go through your house or through your land, you would secure that land and then, basically negotiate until you died to get the largest amount of money from the government. In Colombia, like in many countries, this would stop a large project for years. So that's an example of giving. The government had to pass a law basically saying, once all the planning is done and the government is going and building either through a PPP or directly any public infrastructure, if Joe tells me that his land is worth 100 and I think it's worth 10, I will build the highway and I will put 15 a fund and we'll go to court. But the highway or the bridge or the tunnel or the airport or the port will not be stopped. So that's one example of the many, many changes they had to do. Another one was, of course, we're not going any longer to grant the bid to the lowest bidder. We're going to give it to the company that provides the best insurance, provides the best quality, provides the best coalition of expertise and financial muscle to make sure that this is done. And we will only pay them at the end when they've actually finished what they're building. So, again, the government took some money and went to the private sector and embarked in a very, very ambitious infrastructure project of over $16 billion have been already committed for the U.S. to this project. And it's really very slowly changing the infrastructure in Colombia in a very significant way. So, and road infrastructure on small roads that go to not the most important areas of the country, especially dredging our rivers that had been abandoned for years and are an excellent way of communicating the whole country. Airport infrastructure, railway infrastructure, there's many things to be done, there's many projects, and we see a very healthy appetite and interest from the private sector, including international companies from all over the world bidding, entering into alliances with local companies, with other international companies, pension funds, looking at the place, replacing the financial sector that is the first lender in many of these projects. And we have a number of what we call 4G or fourth generation highways and projects that have already been structured financially are under construction. We have a number that have already been approved, have been bid, and are currently under financial structuring. And we combined these three waves of projects that the government presents to potential investors to be built, and they pay by public money with PPPs that are becoming more and more interesting in different sectors. So the number that I have is that we've approved 33 of these large projects, awarded 31, and we have financial closures in 7. You know, the difficulty now is, or the challenge, I would say, is moving ahead and bringing more money from out of the country to invest in these projects. Projects of large, you know, asset managers, pension funds, they like projects that are already built, that generate a toll permanently, because it's, you know, it's just setting your money in a place where you expect a you know, nice, healthy return for a long period of time. It's much more difficult to convince those large pools of money that you need to invest in something that is being built. Again, there's also an answer for that. You can bid on projects that are partially built, already have tolls, so you have cash flow, and at the same time, you have responsibility or a project to be built. And that is part of what is being done now. Again, the interesting thing is that because the government has been around for almost 7 years, the government has learned a lot from transforming this and looking at the rules and adapting the rules. We've had a lot of people from the private sector come in, work for the government, work with the government, and adapt the conditions but continue the project. That pretty much covers it. I thank you very much for not falling asleep, and I hope and I look forward to hear from the rest of the panels. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rivera. As always, the presentation is very interesting, very energetic, and very insightful. So we thank you. I think we're very lucky. I think it's the 3rd time that we have Ambassador in our office. Thank you.
Is there a video?
Represent first, and you, and then we get
Okay, so our next speakers are Juan Gabriel Perez Chastre. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. He's Executive Director of Invest in Bogota. As mentioned before, it's a non-for-profit private public investment promotion agency, and is formed by the Bogota Chamber of Commerce and the City of Bogota government since 2013. Juan Gabriel is a trade professional with a specialization in foreign relations and negotiations, and has more than 17 years experience in trade and investment promotion that began in the Colombian Ministry of Trade, Industry and Tourism. Today, Juan Gabriel oversees Bogota's strategy for foreign direct investment attraction and international positioning as one of the most attractive places for doing business in Latin America. Following Juan Gabriel, we're going to have Juan Carlos Jimenez Tobon. He's Investment Promotion Manager for Invest Bogota, and he leads a multidisciplinary team of investment promotion officers. He's responsible for the design and implementation of the agency's investment promotion strategy with 5 major areas of focus: IT-based services, creative industries, light manufacturing, life sciences, and infrastructure and city projects. Previously, he was involved in electronic banking, commercial roles for MSC and Citibank in Colombia, and as international sales managers and business development in Car Graphics. Welcome both.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador of Colombia, Nicolás Llorea Ricaurte. I want to thank the Canada-Colombian Chamber of Commerce, ProColombia, Álvaro Concha in Canada, and a special WLP for the opportunity to present the business potential of the Bogota region in infrastructure to Canadian companies in Toronto this morning. I would like to begin by introducing myself. I am Executive Director of Bogotá Investment Promotion Agency, as well as Juan Carlos Jimenez, our Investment Promotion Manager, with us today to share with you the latest regarding infrastructure projects in the city region. This is a key point during our North American campaign to Canadian and US. We are the city's non-profit mixed private foreign direct investment agency created in 2006 to promote the value-add proposition of the city of Bogotá and the surrounding province of Cundinamarca for the industry sectors that the city has identified as a key for employment generation and ecosystem growth. IT-based services, creative industries, life science, light manufacturing, and infrastructure and city projects. The first line of action of the agency, next one, is the promotion of FDI. We are also in charge of the city international marketing strategy, as well as monitoring the current investment climate of the city region. In these 10 years, we have attracted over than 260 investment projects, foreign investment projects, total more than $1 billion US in estimated foreign direct investment, and help create over 24,000 estimated direct jobs in Bogotá and in this surrounding. Together with helping position Bogotá internationally is a center for business in Latin America and one of the best cities for doing business in the region. Invest in Bogotá provide custom-made information to potential investors on business opportunities to ensure they can long list and shortlist in Bogotá as a destination of choice for a Latin American hub and input in terms of building and potential business plan for regional expansion. The agency helps clients through pre-exploratory phase through reinvestment and provide local site visit assistance in meeting with academia, institutionally, vendors, value chain, and potential partners and clients. Our services are free of charge. I would like to leave with you a short video of business opportunities in Bogotá, and then have our investment promotion manager go over the latest advance some of our infrastructure projects. Thank you.
Business, science, technology, privileged location, accessibility, innovation, progress, creativity, culture, young talent, quality of life. This is Bogotá. The central location of Bogotá and the frequent direct air connections with all major cities around the world make it the ideal place to serve global and local markets. El Dorado Airport is #1 in Latin America in cargo movement and #3 in passenger movement. Third most important passenger hub and the largest in cargo handling throughout Latin America. It receives flights from 26 countries, 42 international destinations, with more than 700 direct frequencies and access to markets totaling more than 1.4 billion people across the world. Bogotá generates about 25% of the national gross domestic product and is an outstanding player in Latin America. Bogotá's GDP is higher than that of some countries in Latin America, making it one of the strongest economies in the region. It has more than 300,000 companies, source of 54% of Colombia's financial operations. Bogota is recognized as being the 5th best city to do business, according to America Economia. It is one of the 4 cities of the future, and one of the top 5 for investment in the region.
First of all, starting with the country, so Colombia is one of the fastest growing economies. It's a country that has a lot of opportunity. So as we chose the countries, Colombia had to be one of the ones where we would get started.
Bogota is being promoted internationally as a place for foreign investment in priority sectors that contribute to the economic development through the creation of high added value jobs and transfer of technology. Manufacturing in the sectors of automotive and transportation, processed foods, construction materials, pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical equipment, and high-impact infrastructure and city projects.
The most attractive thing about this city and its people, I think, is that they celebrate creativity, but also business. And you also see thriving businesses that are coming out and using technology to drive totally new opportunities for people here.
The greatest value of the capital region is its people. With a population of 7.9 million, more than 70% of the workforce is made up of young, highly qualified professionals. 115 higher education institutions, 6 of the 100 best Latin American universities, mainly in the economic and administrative sciences, social sciences, and engineering.
Diversification of industry sectors. All of those things are combining right now, along with a growing middle class and wonderfully young workforce. All these things are coming together to give Bogota some great momentum.
Arts capital in October. Its 5 festivals and the destination as a creative city of music by UNESCO make it a space for expression and ingenuity.
We capitalize on the fact that there is so much growth to be had. So I think that the local market is full of potential, but I love about Colombia is the eclectic. Very good, very good.
Every 2 years, it celebrates one of the largest theater festivals in the world and is the location of major fairs, conferences, and exhibitions. Bogota is a green city. It has more than 5,000 parks, 16 wetlands, streams, and nature reserves, and 410 kilometers of bike paths and bike lanes with more than 600,000 daily trips. Every Sunday, Bogota transforms itself with the special bike paths, becoming a meeting place for sports and family outings. Continuing its impressive transformation process, the city is carrying out ambitious large-scale urban renewal programs, developing innovative mobility and infrastructure solutions aimed at turning the city into Latin America's center for knowledge and innovation. Bogota is positioning itself as the business hub of the region, a reference for the best talent and creativity. Bogota is living the change and the future, and you are a part of our transformation.
Well, thank you very much. That was just a brief explanation of what we do with the agency. Highly recognized as one of the best investment promotion agencies at regional level in Latin America by international publications like the Financial Times, as well as Site Selection Magazine and the World Bank. So I'm not going to go in depth of why Bogota. You saw that very briefly. I want to go straight into the matter of what are some of the great business opportunities of the city, not just in lifestyle, as you saw here in the video, but in terms of strategic location, and that means that a company from North America can be located smack in the middle of Colombia and smack in the middle of Latin America, managing business for operations in services as well as manufacturing, industry, healthcare, infrastructure, of course. one of the best airports in the region, ranked third in terms of passenger volume after Guarulhos in Sao Paulo and Mexico City Benito Juarez, and first in air cargo volume. So you saw some of the numbers of the city. I'm going to skip through these. But an incredible driver of growth, the economic capital of the city. More than half of all financial transactions in Colombia go through Bogotá. All major banks, including Canadian banks, of course, have their headquarters in Bogotá, with the exception of Bancolombia, the only national bank with a headquarter outside of Bogotá. And a very diversified economy, mostly in the business sectors of the economy, manufacturing, construction, transportation, and so on. You saw those numbers again. The leitmotiv now is, if you've been to Mexico and Brazil, the place to do business in the rest of Latin America today is Bogotá, larger than many of its neighboring countries. City of Human Talent, where you can find more than 110,000 graduates in tertiary universities, almost 25,000 engineers and life science graduates a year. The top universities in Colombia, Universidad de los Andes on the private side, Universidad Nacional on the national side, or public, and mostly active research groups in the country. Almost half of all the PhDs in Colombia are based in Bogotá. More than half of all medium and large companies in the country are in Bogotá. And in the last 15 years, we have more than tripled the number of companies with base in Bogotá that have foreign capital, including Canadian, of course, and North American in general. The sources of investment, you do not see Canada here because this is mostly what we consider to be production investment. Canadian investment has been consistently more on the extractive energies. And a positive incentive from a free trade zone regime standpoint is how to set up business in Bogotá and in Colombia in a free trade zone, both for services as well as manufacturing and logistics, where you can set up and have a differential income tax rate drop to 20% from a regular average tax rate of roughly 34%, no value-added tax for purchases from the Colombian territory, no local taxes, and the possibility not only to do maquila, import, process, and export, but the possibility you can import into the local Colombian market, which helps balance your P&L and surname, and imports without duties for capital equipment and raw materials. 6 of these major centers, and some of the oldest ones, including Zona Franca de Bogotá, that just turned 20 this year, are located in the outskirts of Bogotá. This free trade zone, by the way, I worked there about 10 years ago. It used to be more like an industrial park. Today it looks more like a university. It's moved consistently from logistics and manufacturing now more into services, BPO, shared service centers. Not very far from here, we have a very large shared service center for Scotiabank, 750 people manning operations for North America, Canada, US, as well as Latin American markets, and a project to bring that up to about 4,000 people and mirror the same center of excellence that Scotiabank has today in Toronto. Zona Franca, Tocancipá, and Sofrandina in the north, more logistics and manufacturing, as well as Intexona Metropolitana, the southwestern side. Occidente, a little biotech, food processing, logistics, and life sciences. And then you have income tax deductions, discounts if you do run environmental projects in terms of tax breaks. If you run research and development and innovation projects, and we're not specifically talking nanotechnology here in terms of complexity, anything that improves processes in Colombia, and if it gets approved by the Ministry of Science, Ciencias, you can have a tax break there as well. For the purchase of capital assets also, and for employment of disabled personnel, employees. Investment opportunities, huge in life sciences, services, and light manufacturing, as well as infrastructure. I run a team of 10 investment officers that basically provide day-on-day service to potential clients in this area. So one of the things that I want you to do after this is please contact me so I put you in direct contact with the officers that will provide you as much bespoke information so you can build a business plan about increasing business opportunities in Bogotá and Colombia in general. Priority sectors, just a little bit more detail. In life sciences, pharmaceutical, medical instruments, cosmetics, and now health services are huge, and we have Canadian examples in some of those. Technical and professional services, the BPO and KPO industry is still growing. Software development, IT, and creative industries, and again, we do have very strong Canadian examples here. In light manufacturing, in processed foods and construction materials, huge opportunity for Canadian and Ontario companies. And in infrastructure and sustainable construction and city projects, as well as certain projects for logistics platforms on the outskirts of Bogotá. So Bogotá is a city with future, a city of cycle paths. 40 years ago, we started one of the world's first ciclovías. It's been copied in various different other geographies in the world. Our current mayor, during his first tenure, ran Transmilenio, which is one of the world's most important bus rapid transit systems. It runs more than 17,000 buses a day. It was built for about 1.5 or 1.6 million passengers a day, but today it's running 2.4 million. So we're actually moving now, within this new tenure, Mayor Peñalosa is projecting the Metro Bogotá, and I'm going to give you some more details on that. Invest in Bogotá has been very active in Transmilenio in the last 3 or 4 years in trying to improve the number of buses within the fleet that are hybrid or electric. And there will be a potential bidding process. We do not have the details yet, but by the end of this year there might be a bidding process to replace at least 1,300 buses from the trunk areas. And these are the larger 100 to 150 passenger buses within the system. Huge opportunity and potential for auto parts manufacturers, the entire value-add chain. In electric mobility too, we have been pioneers in Latin America. We have the second largest electric taxi pilot in Latin America after one in Mexico City with Nissan. Ours is BYD from China, Build Your Dreams, and they're running close to 45 different electric cabs today. They are starting to work with some of the local cab operators and some of these new app manufacturers to see if they can increase the fleet of electric cars and of course electric stations or charging stations within Bogotá and how that connects with the growth of Transmilenio as well. In urban renewal, Centro de Convenciones Ágora will be Colombia's largest convention center, located between downtown Bogotá and the airport today. This is an area that will have almost 800 hectares and will connect with something called Centro Administrativo Nacional, or CAN, which is basically moving the back office of all the national ministries of Colombia, which are located right now in downtown Bogotá, again in an area that is very much equidistant between downtown Bogotá and the airport. And that is probably the most aggressive urban renewal project in the history of Colombia, with almost 3 million square meters of potential construction. 112 different buildings have to be located. The first one is in the project of structuring for tendering sometime during 2018. And then you have private-public projects like Proyecto Fenicia or Triángulo de Fenicia, which is the colonial hub of downtown Bogotá, Universidad de los Andes, organizing urban renewal for about 400 members of the community that today has restaurants, bars, photocopying centers, whatever, around the University of los Andes, including commercial space, residential, and student residences. So the projects in mobile infrastructure, well, this is basically La Avenida Aló, which will be a very important trunk connecting southwest Bogotá to northeast in the future, and the expansion of the entire North Motorway roads. These are expected to be public-private partnerships, and many different concessions have been awarded. One of them is a PPP of a combination of a Colombian and an Israeli company, and it's a railway that is, a roadway going south-north on the east side, on the other side of Bogotá, past the mountains, so that heavy traffic coming from the south all the way up to the north of Colombia does not have to go through the city and reduce mobility, heavy traffic specifically. Moving to the metro. Again, I mentioned today we moved 2.4 million people on a bus rapid transit or mass transit system that was designed for about 1.5, 1.6. So the metro people have already looked at designing at least 4 new lines, and the first line is something that will move not like the previous administration was hoped for as a fully underground metro for various different conditions, including a much higher cost and geographic soil consistency, but also because we are now moving people from the southern edge of the city where most of the daily trips go during public transportation or private transportation today towards the north, moving east towards downtown and then northway up until 127th. It will probably be increased on a third stage to calle 170 on the northern edge of Bogota. For those who do not know Bogota, most of the corporate business runs in this area, north-south, but mostly on the north of Bogota, whereas the airport is located on this area, and most of the living and then industrial areas are in here. One of the things that this administration did was understand the constraints in terms of budget and timing and begin designing a new plan for the metro, a metro that will cost anywhere between 3 and 3.2 billion USD, one that will be designed in terms of the budget existing and how to complement more infrastructure in railway or the heavy metro, and an optimized amount of buses and connectivity of buses with different stations of Transmilenio. So you have a fixed amount that you can work with. You either go fully metro or you go fully buses or somewhere in the middle. And the somewhere in the middle was the best case scenario where they looked at basically these characteristics in terms of improvement, the environmental impact of the city, the urban landscape, much better user experience than Transmilenio has today, increased social benefits in terms of the number of trips and the time that trips take, in terms, again, of course, of the budget and financials, and in terms of project risk. The Metro Bogota project begins with the approval of Empresa Metro de Bogota early last year. So now, for the first time in our history, we finally have one entity designated to manage the metro under Andrés Escobar Uribe, a person who had both a public and a private background in terms of urban development and real estate development. He's managing a team together with Financiera Desarrollo Nacional, who are organizing the project structuring tendering that was awarded last year to Sistra from France, and who will be presenting, and that's something, again, I want you, I'll push this a few different times, but I want you to keep in mind and sort of save the date around August 29th, because that's when the studies from Sistra will come out and many of the details of the actual project concession for the Metro of Bogota will be defined. This combines with one important work that the previous administration led, which is el cable aéreo or aerial cable, which is a aerial cable line 3.4 kilometers in length in the southern area of Bogota. It connects a community that today takes about an hour and a half from up in the mountain down to the Transmilenio trunk, and this will be reduced to about 15 minutes. So this is social mobility per se in a literal sense, and this will connect to the new metro. And then, and I'll see a little more detail of this, Regiotran, which is a mixed national, provincial Departamento de Cundinamarca, which Bogota is the capital of, together with Bogota, in terms of organizing not just the structuring of the project, but how this will work in the actual sense of the tariffs and costs to user. It was complicated getting both a provincial and local government to talk about how this would impact and cost benefit the city or the district of Bogota compared to Cundinamarca, but the latest negotiations are underway to be able to combine this eventually with the Metro Bogota project and some other infrastructure projects in the future. So again, by August of this year, we should have the Sistra studies, and if all goes well, the bidding of the first section of this metro should be around Q4 of this year. If we look at the metro line, this is a metro line of 26 kilometers. I'm sorry, there should be 15 stations. 10 of which those stations should have direct connection with Transmilenio existing today and the new feeder system. Around 3.5 USD billion investment, 75% of that would be building the actual viaduct or the transportation system, and about 25% will go to the feeder system. This was the kind of thing that was defined after analyzing all the best different possibilities that a metro system could have in terms of the combination of bus volume versus heavy rail traffic. And in January of this year, what we had was un Consejo Nacional de Política Económica o Social, or COMPES, which is sort of like a budget reservation from the Ministry of Finance, in which the national government commits to 70% of the bill for the construction and operation of the metro. So with this metro, what we now have is the connectivity with Transmilenio. Again, those 3 stages that will be built, and connectivity with the different phases of Transmilenio, right from Portal de las Américas all the way through Avenida Caracas, and then up to basically the core downtown business center, Calle 72, and eventually to 127. And the third project of that first line will probably go up to 170th Street, and then connecting a very large percentage of the daily traffic. It's going to be 100% electric. It trains with up to 6 cars. And as you probably imagine, there are some Canadian companies already talking to Metro de Bogotá and presenting. The first event we had was 2 weeks ago. 90 different companies, from concessionaires, constructors, designers, telecommunications, railway, and rolling stock companies came to Metro de Bogotá and Invest in Bogotá and presented their wares and their lessons learned in metros, not only in cities like Hong Kong or New York or Toronto, but closer down to Latin America, Panama, Quito, Lima, Mexico City, Sao Paulo. Project implementation of the sections, as I mentioned, where everything depends now on the tendering process, or rather with the technical structuring and consulting to be provided by CISRA in late August, early September. We should work on the tendering, have that ready by Q4 2017, awarded approximately mid-2018. This is what is expected to be now, a U-shaped viaduct with interval stations, with a third rail electric homing in 750 volts. Almost 60,000 passengers an hour, and totally driverless. The highest level of automation in terms of driver requirements. One of the things, the main or most important things, is what type of combination of contractual model and alternatives we have for the building of the metro, and in terms of basically the infrastructure building, the rail and control systems, the rolling stock, who will manage operations and maintenance, and certainly the constructions of the stations. As it stands today, and this should be defined in the coming 2 weeks, it looks like the best alternative is to have a turnkey operation that manages 4 of these and leave the stations to concessions to privateers, which might be an interesting opportunity again also for Canadian companies. All of these actually are interesting opportunities in all degrees for companies from Canada. This is general project schedule to date. So again, by the end of this year, we should have the tendering process running through, and then the bidding and contracting and legal and awarding sometime in mid-2018, almost a year from now, is what we're expecting. What's going to happen now is, will this be a concession? Will this be public works? Will this be turnkey, or will this be tendered in different sections? A little bit more detail in terms of the longitude, number of stations, exchange stations, distance between stations, trains, the different stages, and the investment budget as it stands right now, roughly $3 billion USD, but obviously this can increase for various reasons once the structuring is provided in August, notwithstanding currency exchanges. That's both USD and Colombian peso. What we have now is a model design where there are two potential options. One, splitting up several contracts, and option number two, a single contract. The analysis is basically a consequence of what has been learned today by Metro de Bogotá in terms of best case experiences, obviously working under the Colombian legal framework, and then what is risk distribution between the different models, the turnkey and the separate contracts. So the first option is where you have rolling stock specifications, electromechanical equipment, communication system, and technical assistant, all of this under one different contract. Then you have civil work construction of both track and stations for both early segments, operation and maintenance, and collection. And the second model, turnkey, where you have all of these combined, including civil work construction, rolling stock specifications, electromechanical, and then obviously operation and maintenance. All of these are interesting in both considerations as far as we've been talking to Canadian or North American companies in general. This is a process that has been very open internationally. Unlike some other processes for metro construction in Latin America in the past few years, we want this to be multidisciplinary geographically. So we're looking at also inviting Asian manufacturers and constructors, European, North American, Latin American. This was the seminar that we ran 2 weeks ago on 4 different themes. It was 4 days of June 6 through 9, where we were looking at the details of civil engineering, rolling stock, equipment and telecommunications, and services. And again, this was the important one, the second annual foreign direct investment meeting in around August 31st and September 1st. This is an important save the date if you want to be on the ground when the latest information on the financial structuring project comes about. Other projects that are running through in the city. Our traffic light intersection system is 30, 40 years old, and we need to bring this up to date. There is a budget of close to 80 million USD for somebody willing to design, install close to 1,500 or lighting systems for close to 1,500 intersections, as well as a centralized control system, electric backup, monitoring cameras and intersections, and so on. And of course, the PMO, as well as interventoria, or the civil engineering oversights. This is something that will probably be tendered by late this year as well. The Regiotram, which is this regional train that will take people from a dormitory city on the southwest of Bogota, Estación in Facatativá, and will run through for about 44 kilometers all the way to downtown Bogota, Estación de la Semana, and stop at the airport. It'll serve 5 different municipalities of Bogota with about 71.5 million passenger volume a year. It's a project of about 1.5 billion, and this will probably be tendering late 2018. Obviously, this will include construction, maintenance, operation. Will be run on royalties. Another important project in Bogota is Airport El Dorado 2. Our airport was totally revamped 4.5, 5 years ago. International terminal, domestic terminal about 3 years ago. It's already running, I would say, overbooked. So there is a new project under Agencia Nacional de Infraestructura, together with the Civil Aviation Authority, to grow into a new airport called El Dorado 2. A new airport that, according to studies run so far, will probably be more of a low-cost airline model to be built in the municipalities of Mosquera and Funza, Mosquera and Madrid, sorry. and we'll have to connect with that regional tram through to the new airport and consistently allow for the growth and expansion of air traffic through our busiest airport yet. In PPPs, this administration started 2016, including the possibility of public-private partnerships for the construction, retrofit, and maintenance and operation, up to including the possibility of health service provisioning for 6 hospitals, Bosa, La Felicidad, Usme, Simón Bolívar, Santa Clara, y Materno-Infantil. Approximately 2,000 beds among all of these, roughly 300, 350 each. There was a bidding that just went through, was awarded to Curry and Brown from the UK for the financial structuring process for these 6 hospitals. Again, this would be interesting at a PMO level as well as construction and maybe for a Canadian company that wants to run, operate, and maintain health infrastructure also. And Proyecto Administrativo CAN, again, one of the largest urban renewal projects in Latin America. This is totally private in terms of the business model, or rather, public-private with the business model of having public construction infrastructure being built by privateers and then using commercial spaces and residential areas to pay off for it. This could be a PPP and, with a reversal after 21 years or so, operation and maintenance. Very, very large in terms of CapEx, no less than 138 million, I think. It could be up to 112 different buildings to be built in El Salitre area in the middle of the growth of Bogota and very close to the airport and central to downtown as well. Other smart city projects. There is the possibility for a unique platform for all public patient medical records. Today, every district hospital has its own system. There has to be some sort of unification. This will probably run early 2018. I mentioned the street lighting project. There is urban renovation potential in the historical center. The National Museum is a project that might be coming through next year. Council Renewal, I mentioned this as well. And there is the possibility of improving and bringing up to date marketplaces in Bogota to create tourist destinations out of what are traditional marketplaces in Bogota. The public-private partnership for health, this is key. Again, the new hospitals that I mentioned. And in mobility, the growth in Transmilenio, the corridors, especially to the west. 2 logistics platforms that we are bringing up to pre-feasibility. And in fact, that team was under invest in Bogota just about 2 months ago. 2 large logistics cross-docking stations for the 18-wheelers coming into Bogota, one receiving in the south in Suacha, one on the western side that connects more towards the northern ports. As you probably know, Colombia, we have ports both on the Atlantic and the Pacific, and there is a huge amount of cargo passing through those. Logistics platforms are key in making sure that they don't impact transportation. And then there is also a Security Command and Public Control Center for Surveillance, Homeland Security that is being worked on. It's a little bit more closed doors today because of security reasons, but will probably be an interesting proposition for technology companies from Canada and North America in general. These are some of the events that we've been pushing with Secretaría de Salud for the PPPs, with Cundinamarca for the Regiotram, with the Bogota Metro that I mentioned, and with road infrastructure that will probably begin later on this year with Instituto de Desarrollo Urbano, which is sort of like the construction and design side of the city. And that's basically it. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Juan Gabriel. Juan Carlos, that was an excellent presentation. I'm sure you guys are going to be very busy after the event with lots of questions. So we're a little bit running behind. We're going to talk very briefly, very soon to our panelists. And I'm going to introduce my partner, Ted Betts. Just for you who don't know, Gowans WLG, our firm, is a law firm. It's a Canadian law firm that is a global law firm with more than 1,400 lawyers in 18 cities around the world. We're primarily focused on industries. And one of the industries that we focus very much is, and where we have significant expertise, is the infrastructure industry. So what that means is that we're full service law firms, but we have expertise that actually can cover and definitely advise on all of the aspects relating to any specific industry, infrastructure or energy, for example. We cover all aspects of energy, life sciences, natural resources, etc. So Ted Bett, who's my partner, he's the head of infrastructure and construction group for Gallon WELG. Ted is a certified specialist in construction law, and is an expert with more than 20 years of experience in large-scale construction, P3 infrastructure and development projects that span from energy, renewable, and nuclear, oil, and gas, infrastructure and social community development, among others, in projects around the world and in Latin America. Ted currently sits as the vice chair of the executive of the construction law section of the Ontario Bar Association, and he's also the chair of the construction lean act reform subcommittee of the Ontario Bar Association Construction Infrastructure Executive. Ted is going to be our moderator, and he's going to introduce our panel. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you very much, France, and thank you everybody for arriving and joining us today. That was some great presentations. Clearly a lot of opportunities in Colombia, and they're not just in the future. They are projects on the ground right now. Great opportunities for Canadians, and we're going to speak with our panelists who are there now, Canadians who are working in and on projects in Colombia. So I will welcome them up. First, we'll have Tori McKillop, Director, Emerging Markets at Elliston. You want to join us all? Carl Pierce, Global Director, Investment and Business Planning at Hatch. Jean-Sébastien Charon, Regional Manager, South America and Caribbean at Export Development. Sometimes we feel that the coffee is not enough to wake everybody up, so we'll perk you up somehow. And then lastly but not least, Juan Jimenez, Senior Portfolio Manager, International Equities at PSP Investments. Thank you very much. So as Franz mentioned, we're a little behind schedule, but I'd like to take the time to take advantage of our speakers here because they really have the real life experience of Canadians going down successfully into Colombia and taking advantage of these many opportunities. And so if it's okay, we're going to push past a little bit our time. I will have some questions for our panelists, but I hope that we can engage the audience with some questions as well, and then we can get some feedback on some of the questions that you have. And of course, you're welcome to stay behind afterwards to ask questions for those who can remain. So I'll start it off. We'll speak to, I'll start off with Tori perhaps, but and then follow along the table. And if you could tell us a bit about what projects you're working on now in Colombia. Why did you consider going into Colombia as opposed to anywhere else in the world? And how did it happen and come together for you?
Sure. Thanks, Ted. I really appreciate being here today. When I look back at how Elliston started in Colombia, I really see dots, and I can really only connect those dots in hindsight. It was not a clear path. And to be honest, the first dot is probably in 2004 with the advent of the Canadian P3 economy. And that really enabled Elliston to become more than just a general contractor, but rather a construction services company. Because we realized that we really needed to be able to provide cradle-to-grave services in order for our projects to be a success. So then if you fast forward almost 10 years, in fact there was a conference in Chile, and we were in Chile chasing quite a few P3 projects. And there was a chance meeting between our Center of Excellence gentleman, Lloyd Keller, who's our concrete specialist and our now partner in Colombia, ARPRO. And they got to talking about this challenging new project that ARPRO was going to be going after, the Atrial Tower. And they really were just asking for our advice on how they might build this 43-tower building. And then fast forward a little bit further, 6 months, we were suddenly in partnership with our pro in a construction management role. So that's really how Alistan got started in Colombia. It wasn't a targeted market per se. We were really focused on Chile, and there you go.
Maybe we'll ask Carl to comment on how Hatch, this is what Hatch is doing and how you got down there as well.
Sure. So Hatch started looking at Colombia, I guess, a few years back, 4 or 5 years back. We saw important opportunities in some of the key sectors served by Hatch, particularly mining, a strong project pipeline in Colombia, very competitive operating costs, and therefore growth in the industry, as well as in infrastructure. We saw a lot of opportunities, especially in light of the successful TPP programs sponsored by the government. So we started the search for a local firm that would have a strategic fit with Hatch, and identified a company in Medellin, Indisa, in Medellin. We started working with them through joint venture agreements first, executing projects together to get to know each other, make sure that was fit, and then entering into a formal due diligence process in 2015. I was responsible of that process. I was based in Santiago, in the Chilean of Hatch at the time. And in 2016, we materialized the acquisition of Indisa in Medellin. Since then, we've been integrating. It's been a successful integration of the two companies. We're now working for clients globally out of Medellin. Key projects we're working on right now, just to name a few, are projects for EPM, Empresas Públicas de Medellin. Indisa has also a strong background on light industry. We're doing work for Grupo Agros, cement, FEMSA, the largest franchise Coca-Cola bottler in the world, Procter & Gamble, across Latin America, out of Medellin. We support Procter & Gamble in the expansion of their processing facilities across the region. So it's been quite a successful integration for us so far.
Great. Maybe Juan, you can tell us about PSP.
Sure. So I think PSP has been quite positive in Colombia for some time. We started investing in Colombia in 2008 through our real estate group. The initial investments we made together with our partner in Colombia, which has been so far Bancolombia, one of our main partners there. We created the Fondo Inmobiliario Colombia, which is a real estate fund where the bank contributed the branches and some real estate assets. We contributed capital. That fund has been running and it still runs today, and we continue to be quite interested in expanding the breadth of that fund. On top of that, we also partnered with a local developer called Amarillo, where we initially invested in projects directly with them. So we provided the capital, they took care of construction activities across, mainly for residential projects. And more recently, we have increased our partnership with them by taking a direct position and becoming a direct partner at the holding level. More recently, at the public markets level, we have been very active in Colombia. We are currently one of the major shareholders in one of the main oil producers in the country, and as well we're increasing investments across a variety of sectors, mainly on the consumer side. We are quite optimistic about the fundamentals, the dynamics, the macroeconomics, the demographics, as well as many other important things that for the public markets are quite important, in particular the very strong independence of the central bank. I think we have actually seen that in a period of kind of difficult political movements, and the central bank has been very, very strong, which for us is obviously a critical element to deploy capital in a country. Overall, I think we have invested somewhere in the region of $400 million in Colombia. We continue to be quite active in the country and looking forward for increasing our stakes there.
That's great, that's great. Now, Jean-Sébastien, EDC plays a slightly different role in facilitating, helps Canadian businesses grow abroad. Can you tell us a bit about what you're doing in Colombia and how you're helping Canadian businesses grow in the sector?
Thank you, Ted. Indeed, for EDC, as Canada's export credit agency, Colombia is a very important and growing market in the Americas. We've had an office in Bogota since 2013, and last year I'm very pleased to say that we had our biggest year ever. We supported $1.7 billion of business, out of which was $1.1 billion of financing. So very happy about that, and we see a lot of opportunity going forward. One of the big deals that we supported last year was alluded to by the ambassador in his presentation. The largest investment was by a Canadian company, Brookfield, who bought, along with its partners, one of the largest power generator companies in Colombia, Isagen. They generate about 20% of the power in Colombia. They have the biggest hydro power plant as well. So very happy about that. Continue supporting investments into the market, as the ambassador alluded to as well. Canada is one of the strongest investors in Colombia over the last few years. And initially, as EDC was building its business, we supported a lot of investment in the oil and gas sector. Three main companies we supported: Canacol Energy, Pyrex Resources, as well as Gran Tierra Energy. So three companies out of Calgary that made early investments that have provided very good returns for these companies. So very happy about that. And since then, in the last few years, we've been focused on diversifying that portfolio into the infrastructure sector. I think the presentations were very comprehensive this morning, illustrating the substantial opportunities in the infrastructure sector, whether it's in the road, the port, infrastructure space. So that's really something that we want to continue to support. How do we support? Different ways. We're building relationships with some of the key players in Colombia in the infrastructure space, whether EPM, EEB, ISA, so that we can position our Canadian companies with these larger multinationals. How do we do that? Well, we provide some financing capacity to these companies, and therefore this helps us engage with these companies so that we can help Canadian companies enter their supply chains. How do we do that? Through matchmaking activities, through introductions, through missions. EDC has been organizing a lot of outbound, inbound missions in the infrastructure space, smart grid area as well. Each year, actually, we do an infrastructure mission in 3 cities: Bogota, Medellin, and Barranquilla. It's a full week. We're doing it again this year. For some of you, a little plug here, may be interested in participating. It's the last week of November, and this culminates with the largest infrastructure congress in Colombia that takes place in Cartagena, the National Infrastructure Congress. So if you're interested, I invite you to come and speak to me at the end. I'd be glad to share more details. So again, I'll be brief. Sorry if I'm taking a bit more time here, but the P3 space, which was mentioned by Tori, Canada is very strong, and we've been working closely with some of the Colombian authorities, such as the FDN, the Financiera de Desarrollo Nacional, financial institution that wants to help infrastructure companies. So we've been working closely with them to introduce them to the key players in Canada, such as Infrastructure Ontario and others. We do see a lot of capacity building opportunities in that space and supporting our companies.
That's great. That's great. So you've each talked about some of the opportunities you're pursuing now and some of the opportunities down the road that you're looking at. Maybe just briefly, and I'm throwing this at them, I didn't get prepped on this question, but what do you think some of the advantages are for you as Canadian businesses going into Colombia that we have here that puts us in a better position than other companies around the world going into a country like Colombia?
I can start. I think one thing that Elaston is very excited about that the Colombian market is going to provide is the P3 opportunity. We've had a lot of success, specifically in social infrastructure. I know that there's a big push for transportation right now, but I mean the 6 hospitals are obviously something that we're certainly tracking and excited about. But I think although we are very excited to be a Canadian company operating in Colombia, the biggest hurdle or obstacle that we need to overcome is we certainly need to work in partnership with somebody that's local. We don't pretend to understand the Colombian market. We are certainly learning it, but it would be foolish of us to go forward on such an initiative with such high risk without operating with someone locally. So I think that's Elaston's takeaway is that, you know, there's a P3 opportunity, but we need to find local partners through the help of EDC and others who are going to work alongside Elaston and bring those projects across the line to success.
And do you work with other Canadian companies you've done other P3 projects with? You try to bring some of them on because you work with them in a team, or is it really just the local business?
I think that Elaston is able to operate in all 3 boxes of a P3: equity, design, build, and facility services, and we would love to partner with someone locally to tap into their local expertise.
Others, Juan or Carl?
Sure. I mean, I share the view. We have the fortune of having 2 very good partners in Colombia, which help us, you know, deploy capital in the better way. I think the advantage, I guess, we have as an organization is that we're long-term investors. We have a long-term capital. In fact, we won't have any outflow of money from our funds for the next 20 years. So that gives us a long-term perspective, and these slides that our ambassador shared with us on the long-term trend, we can sustain those investments throughout time. I think that's the let's say the key advantage that we have. But as I said, for us, we cannot claim to be only contributors to capital. We need to deploy the relationship and deploy, you know, long-term good, let's say, marriages with our partners that will guarantee that over the long term we can successfully, you know, achieve a good return for our pensioners.
Great. Carl, advantages for Hatch being a Canadian company?
We certainly see the synergies. We've identified that local partner. We've been, you know, leveraging the local presence. They are an established 300 people company providing services in Medellin, and they operate in industries that are quite synergistic, I guess, with the key sectors for Hatch that Hatch serves. Prior to that, Hatch had worked in Colombia, particularly in the mining sector with Cerro Matoso, for former BHP, now Sub 32, and obviously with all the changes that have been referenced for happening in the country, we see lots of opportunity. We see lots of opportunity also in the mining sector beyond the traditional nickel and beyond the traditional coal sectors. Lots of opportunity on coal too, coming from quite competitive operations. As we know, $7 to $8 a ton, cheaper than Australian coal, and with the expansion of the Panama Canal, Colombian coal is entering into Asian markets. Only last year, coal exports had increased by 16–17%, driven by new Asian markets. We also see the government support in the mining industry with the list of projects of national interest, and also the government initiative to formalize artisanal or illegal gold mining, which is quite heavy in Colombia. 80% of the gold output in Colombia is by artisanal producers, I guess, and that's kind of the DNA of Hatch Mining and Metals, so we certainly see the leverage there. And then on the infrastructure, really, it's been said, what's happening in Colombia is quite remarkable from an infrastructure point of view. The 4G program that was presented before by the ambassador, those 33 projects, 10 of which have entered into construction actually, and 7, as the ambassador said, 7 additional ones have reached financial close. So certainly an active market on an infrastructure, from an infrastructure point of view, where Hatch also has a lot of experience globally, and we're hoping to play in that market.
That's great. We are running over time at the moment, but I'll take a moment maybe to ask if anybody did have any questions for our panelists here in their experience in taking their businesses or facilitating Canadian businesses to go down to Colombia. I don't know. Anybody have any questions at this point? No? Oh, I got one at the back there.
Sure. I just have a question about the artisanal mining. I was wondering if anyone set up mills so that artisanal miners don't use, let's say, very environmentally unfriendly methods for separating the ore from the gold.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge given like I said, the volume of artisanal mining in the gold industry. As you pointed out, the problem here, the big issue is that, as you said, they don't use traditional methods, and they produce significant environmental issues and contamination, and that's creating in the local communities a very bad perception towards mining, to the point where what we saw last year, a municipality, Talima, I think, municipality voted against mining, and then the Constitutional Court supported that vote, which created that uncertainty of who has the power to provide mining permits, the federal government or the local government or the municipal government, and then caused one of the significant gold projects, La Colosa, right from Anglo Ashanti, to actually stop. And it's really causing that problem of bad perception, and the challenge is how to formalize that sector, how to bring better practices, and the government is playing a big role in that, so that the community's perception towards mining is improves, and then allows the large-scale mining and the large-scale mining companies, particularly gold mining in Colombia, to proliferate. I don't, I guess, have the answer as to, how to deal exactly with the issue. I think the government is taking the right steps. The federal government is taking the right steps in terms of formalizing them, and then the companies also have to do their share. There's plenty of positive examples around the world on how mining companies can actually deploy their processing and beneficiation methods in an environmentally friendly way and aligned with the local communities.
Okay, I think given that we're after 10:30 now, we'll wrap it up. I thank the panelists tremendously for your input and information you've relayed. Feel free, anybody, to approach any of them or any of the panelists, speakers you've heard from today, or Franz or myself to talk about opportunities and ways any of us can help you, or based on our experience and skills in the region, can help you start your business there. We've heard a lot about the opportunities. There's clearly a tremendous amount of opportunities. Canada is uniquely positioned to take advantage of those, either because we've got a great relationship with the Canada Colombia Chamber of Commerce and Trade, or Trade and Investments, right? And with organizations like EDC, who are there set up to help Canadian businesses grow and thrive in the world. So at this point, I'd like to thank our speakers, in particular His Excellency Nicolas Loredo Cuarto, the ambassador, our speakers from Invest Bogota, Juan Gabriel and Juan Carlos, thank you. Our panelists, our great panelists, and their experiences here, Tori, Carl, Juan, and Jean-Sebastian, and our co-hosts, Andreas Trevino from the Canada-Colombia Chamber of Investment and Trade. I understand that there are some opportunities for one-on-one meetings with our guests. If you are interested in speaking about the opportunities directly with the Chamber, Andreas is here, and our guests from Invest Bogota are here, and they're going to setting up meetings to talk about specific opportunities that might be great for your organization. And thank you as well to Frances, who helped organize this. She's the co-leader of our Latin America practice, and thank you all for coming.